Welcome to No Rares Required, Episode 17, Orzhov Corruption. Every week I discuss a drafting strategy for a different archetype, and today I will be covering my strategy for drafting Orzhov, or White-Black, in Phyrexia All Will Be One. It is the third most drafted archetype, but I've found Orzhov to be a decent spot for in-pod drafting. Speaking of which, I host a weekly community draft on Twitch. If you're interested in joining, hit me up on Discord. In the community draft last week, I drafted an excellent Orzhov deck that made it to the finals. The archetype is pretty straightforward, it doesn't have a lot of traps, and its win rate seems to support that. The theme is corrupted, and unlike Izzet, it is on point. You want to get your opponent to have at least 3 poison counters in this archetype. Why, you may ask? Because you have some cards that go from good to busted. For example, my Tier S Mythic level Common Anoint with Affliction. This card is great in every black archetype, but is absolutely busted in Orzhov. If your opponent is corrupted, this is easily the most powerful common. Exile target creature for 2. This is also the reason to be in Orzhov. Since it is premium removal, it does tend to go quick, so you won't get to see this much past turn 4, so grab them when you can. My one and only Tier 1 common is Crawling Chorus, aka Triangle Man. It performs well in the other white archetypes, but it performs the best in Orzhov. What is so great about this card is that if you are planning on using early removal instead of developing the board, a mistake I will continue to warn everyone about, this card leaves behind a 1/1 might. And your easiest path to getting your opponent corrupted is by taking advantage if they stumble in the early game, and this is the best card at common to do just that. It is also a great target for my Tier 2 common Flincing Raptor. Flincing Raptor also works wonders at getting those early poison counters. When it enters the battlefield, it gives a toxic creature, like Crawling Chorus, +1/+1 and flying until end of turn. And outside of Incisor Glider, the 1/3 flyer for 2 in white, or Gitaxian Raptor, the 1/4 flyer for 3 in blue, this card also can end up giving your opponent several poison counters, since archetypes like Gruul or Green-Red are weak to flyers. One downside is that the toxic archetypes are very popular. I think a lot of people just pick up any card with the keyword toxic, as it's an easy tip to give to people who are new to the set. Similar to Triangle Man, this card goes early for a common, around 4 or 5. Next up we have Indoctrination Attendant. I put it at Tier 2. I've mentioned this card in my guide to Boros, since being able to bounce and recast a 4 Mirrodin equipment is about as expensive, or sometimes cheaper, than the equip cost to reattach it to a creature, and you get a free 2/2 out of it. I think it is equally good in Orzhov, albeit for different reasons. One of the ways you win in Orzhov is by going wide with toxic creatures, and this card helps you do just that. It's also a great response to the enchantment-based removal in the set, like Planar Disruption, Mesmerizing Dose. These also tend to go late. It's not uncommon to see these still available around pick 7 or 8. My third Tier 2 common is Basilica Shepherd. It's not as strong as it is in Azorius, where you get benefits off the 2 artifacts coming into play, but similar to Attendant, you benefit off of creating the 2 1/1 mites and going wide. People have started to pick this card up more highly than at the beginning of the set, around pick 5 or so. One thing worth mentioning, though, is in pod drafting, you may see this later, since people are a little bit more hesitant to pick it up until they know that their main color is white. I try to run 1 or 2 as my top end, and I think it is the best 5-drop at common. My fourth Tier 2 common is Planar Disruption. Similar to Boros and Celestia, you are aiming to put early pressure on your opponent, and this is great cheap removal. Also, keep in mind that this can enchant artifacts as well as planeswalkers. I had a game where someone put this on my Tamiyo's Immobilizer, and I was devastated. Just like Anoint with Affliction, this is premium removal, so you won't see it much past turn 4. My last Tier 2 common is Stinging Hivemaster. This card helps you go wide by spawning a 1/1 Toxic Might when it dies, and it itself has Toxic. This card tends to go late and is a great reward for being in Orzhov. Now for the Tier 3 commons. These are commons that are better than filler, but I don't want as many as I can grab, or they have alternatives for their role. My first Tier 3 common is Duelist of Deep Faith. It is important to have one and 2-drop toxic creatures, and this card pairs nicely with combat tricks and can be used to bluff since your opponent will be hesitant to block it. I put it at Tier 3 since Blightbelly Rat is a decent replacement. My next Tier 3 common is Complete Devotion. You may have noticed that every creature I've mentioned outside of Basilica Shepherd has Toxic. This is the best archetype for Complete Devotion. It does go down a little bit in value if you've struggled to fill your curve with toxic creatures, since drawing the card is the real reward that puts it above filler in Orzhov. My third Tier 3 common is Blightbelly Rat. You want 1 and 2 cost toxic creatures, but it is interchangeable with Duelist of Deep Faith. Also, Dune Mover, the 2/1 colorless toxic artifact, is a decent replacement if you're having a hard time finding the 6 1 or 2 drop toxic creatures. The secret is out that you need cheap toxic creatures to make the toxic strategies work, so you need to take these 1 and 2 drop toxic creatures early, around pick 4 or 5. My last Tier 3 common is Testament Bearer. Some people have been really down on this card, but I've really enjoyed it. They tend to go very late. It's not uncommon to pick these up on the wheel around pick 10 or even 11. I'd much rather fill the 4 slot with Attendance, but I tend to find myself running 1 or 2 in Orzhov because they are card neutral when they die, and they can help you dig for your late game plays like Basilica Shepherd. Now for the uncommons, and we have a familiar face. Guess what? Annex Sentry is still a Tier S Mythic uncommon. Surprise, surprise. This card is great and an easy pack 1 pick 1. With how fast-paced the set is, being able to remove your opponent's early plays while you develop the board is amazing. And look, it also has Toxic, so it fits right in. My next Tier S Mythic level uncommon is Drown in Ichor. It's even more amazing in Orzhov than it is in Dimir. Being able to remove an opponent's early blocker while also giving them an additional poison counter can be absolutely devastating to your opponent's tempo and can help you get your opponent corrupted as early as turn 2. These go quick though, so you'll want to take them when you see them. My first Tier 1 uncommon for Orzhov is Ossification, bringing our total count of 2-cost removals to 4. This is the best removal that white has, and it performs well in every white archetype. Like Planar Disruption, it also can target Planeswalkers, but it exiles instead of leaving the target on the battlefield. Also, it's premium removal that goes quick, so you'll want to take this as well as soon as you see it. My second Tier 1 uncommon is Bilious Skulldweller. Similar to Dimir, this card is great at getting that early toxic damage through, and incredibly punishing if your opponent stumbles on the early turns. The Death Touch also allows it to block well, as you build your army of 1/1 mites. It is also another card that gets picked up early, so take it when you can. My first Tier 2 uncommon is Bladed Ambassador. You really want your 2-drops to have Toxic, but this card is the exception. It's more of a turn 3 play, since you want to be able to keep up the mana to give this indestructible. This card usually requires 2 things of interaction to remove, or they have to wait for you to pop the counter and then use removal in response. Either way, it is great at drawing removal from your opponent, and I'll take as many as I can grab. My second Tier 2 uncommon is Ambulatory Edifice. It goes a little later for an uncommon, around pick 4 or 5. There are so many creatures with 1 life in this set that this is usually a 2-for-1. You can snipe a Might or use it after combat to pick off something left at 1 HP. I've been really pleased with this card, and would happily run as many as I am offered. My last Tier 2 uncommon is Vivisection Evangelist. I found it difficult to end up with these, which makes me speculate that people are splashing it into other archetypes, which is something I don't recommend. It's a great card in Orzhov, though, and worth running as many as you can grab. It's also a disgusting target to bounce if you hit the Dream with the Eternal Wanderer and can just machine gun down their entire board. Now for the Tier 3 uncommons. Jawbone Duelist really needs combat tricks to shine, so if you find yourself running multiple copies of Complete Devotion, then I might go a little bit higher on this card. It's also a nice turn 2 if you can follow it up with a Flincing Raptor on turn 3, since the double strike means every time that it hits an opponent, they get a toxic counter. My next Tier 3 uncommon is Porcelain Zealot. Being able to turn your 1/1 mites into 3/3s every turn is nice. I think this card is slightly overrated. I only put it above Filler and Orzhov, and even then, it gets taken so early that I tend to pick something else over it. It's also a very offensive-sided card, since it's just a 2/3 for 4. Still, it is better than Filler. My last Tier 3 uncommon is Sheoldred's Edict. It would be Tier 2, but I've found Vraska's Fall to be a decent replacement at the common level, and we already have a lot of 2-cost removal options in Orzhov. It does tend to go late for an uncommon, around pick 4 or 5, and I'm happy running 1 or 2 since it's a good answer to Planeswalkers. Now for the rares. The Eternal Wanderer is a broken card. It is great in every white archetype, but it deserves a special mention in Orzhov, as it is the card's best archetype. Being able to bounce Vivisection Evangelist is absolutely game-winning. But Basilica Shepherd, Attendant, Edifice, anything with a decent enter the battlefield effect is also a great target. I haven't used the ultimate very much, but it's a nice option to have, and you can also just use it as a way to go wide by creating a 2/2 double strike token every turn. As is tradition, I'm going to skip over some rares but give them a brief mention. White Sun's Twilight is best in Azorius because of the artifact synergies and being able to cast it instead of for 7, you can get away with casting it for lower. And Archfiend of the Dross, which is best in Rakdos, where you can easily give it more oil counters. Both are Tier 1 and great to include in Orzhov. But here is a rare that is best in Orzhov, Skrelv's Hive. You need to be in a toxic strategy for Skrelv's Hive to work, and almost every single creature I've recommended so far has toxic. Being able to give every single creature lifelink, if you have Corrupted, is huge, and helps you win many races. Spawning a 1/1 also fits better into the go wide strategy of Orzhov, where I give it a Tier 2, than Celestia, where I think it is a Tier 3. I'm going to skip Kaido Dancing Shadow, since I've mentioned him enough in other guides. I put him at Tier 2. Basically, if you're in blue or black, I think he's worth splashing. Skrelv Defector Might is best in Azorius because it's an artifact, or in Celestia, where you can use it to help get through board stalls and help protect your combat tricks. Rhea Ivor, Bane of Bladehold, is a rare just for Orzhov. I put her at Tier 3. She fits perfectly into the go-wide strategy by using something like an unblocked flyer to create a swarm of mites, and then giving every attacking creature +1/+0 when she attacks. It's also worth noting that you can target one of your opponent's creatures when you swing for lethal so that you don't negate your own damage. Another Tier 3 rare that is just for Orzhov is Kaya, Intangible Slayer. She's Tier 3 because 7 mana is a difficult amount to get to, but being able to drain for 3 is very difficult to race, and removing their best creature and gaining a 1/1 token of your own can be absolutely devastating. I'm going to skip Black Sun's Twilight and Glissa Sunslayer, both Tier 3 in Orzhov, but best in Golgari. Now here's a card I said I'd cover more in Orzhov, but it turns out I should have mentioned Mirix in my guide to Azorius. I was originally thinking that I'd save it for Orzhov or Celestia because they are the toxic combat strategies or archetypes, But after 2 weeks of exploring Azorius further, I think that it performs the best in Azorius to trigger the artifact enter the battlefield effect. And its second best archetype is Orzhov, and to a lesser extent Selesnya, since one of your win conditions is going wide with 1/1 Toxic Mites. It also helps you splash if you end up picking up a card like Kaido or Glissa Sunslayer. My last Tier 3 rare is the Seed Core. This is another land I said I'd cover in Orzhov or Selesnya. Its best archetype is Orzhov, but I prefer it in Azorius over Selesnya. I'll just leave it at that as a little teaser to be covered in more detail in my Selesnya guide. In Orzhov, you aim to have enough 1/1 mites and a go-wide strategy that this becomes a tap, deal 2 damage via an unblocked mite. The stars kind of have to be in perfect alignment though, since this tends to get picked up early and I find myself wanting other cards over it. But occasionally I've picked this up late, and it was a great addition. Now for the mythics. And I hate to say it, but Orzhov has no specific mythic that performs best in Orzhov over the other archetypes. So I'll just put up a picture of Shelly while I ramble. Sheoldred, the Apocalypse, is clearly tier 1 and great in any black archetype. I find myself being drawn to Rakdos since I think it is where you get the most from gaining 2 life or pinging them for 2 every turn. The other mythics worth a mention are Sword of Forge and Frontier. It's tier 2 in Orzhov, but it's best in Boros because of equipment synergies. Elvish Norn, Mother of Machines, tier 3 in Orzhov, and as I mentioned previously, absolutely busted in Azorius. And last but not least, Vraska, Betrayal's Sting. I also put her as tier 3 in Orzhov, where she tends to play out as expensive removal. I think her best archetype is Golgari, since the green beef tends to protect her long enough to get multiple removals off. So thank you for enjoying my simple guide to Orzhov. I posted a full draft with Orzhov earlier this month that was running Vraska, Betrayal's Sting, and White Sun's Twilight. If you want to see how I use this guide to grab trophies, I'll include the link in the top right. If you enjoyed the guide, please take a moment to hit like and subscribe. I appreciate it. And as always, if there's an archetype that you want to see next, let me know in the comments below. Once again, thank you all for the support, and I'll see you next week.